We're here today with Kathryn Marsh, who's a candidate in the Republican primary for States Attorney in Calvert County, Maryland. Kathryn, you've been with this agency, with the State's Attorney's Office in Calvert County for 20 years. What part of your work gives you the most satisfaction to know that you've accomplished getting justice done?
That's going to be child abuse cases. They're our most vulnerable victims, and they are often the most hardest to try, just because when I look at sexual assault for child abuse cases specifically, on average about 8 out of 10 times the mother sides with the abuser in that case. And so making sure the child knows that there is somebody who's fighting for them, making sure that our child victim knows that there are people who believe in them, and that we have a jury of 12 citizens who believe our child and give our child justice with a conviction is the most rewarding thing we can do. One of the best things that I have is when I can be out in the community and have a child victim who's now a young lady or a young man who can come up to me and tell me where they are in their life, what's going on, who they're living with. Encountered one who was working at a fast food restaurant, and she came around the counter just to give me a big hug to ask if I remembered her, which of course I did, and to tell me what was going on with her life, that she was a senior in high school now, that she was just getting a scholarship for college, and knowing that being able to take her out of such a toxic environment and get her abuser behind bars really opened up the world for her to allow her to accomplish everything that she deserved in life.
Kathryn Marsh is running for State's Attorney in Calvert County, Maryland. She's been working as a prosecutor for 20 years. Kathryn, would you tell the readers of the Chesapeake Today one of the most difficult tasks you have as a prosecutor?
Well, I think the first thing is to understand that a prosecutor, our duty is actually to see that justice is done. Our duty is not a conviction. Our duty is not a quota. It is to see that justice is done in the community. And in order to do that, we have to weigh all aspects of a case. So when I get a case, when I begin the screening process with the police officers, I break it down and I look at it as, here's the prosecution side. Here's what the defense attorney or the defendant might try to say. Here's what the victim wants. And here's what could be of most importance to the community. And I have to look at all of those factors together and decide, what are the appropriate charges? What evidence do I have for and against the case? And then even factor it further to what's in the best interest of the community, the victim, and even the defendant when it comes up to a plea offer and a sentencing recommendation. Because all of those have to be considered when coming up with the just result.
Kathryn, you've been with the Calvert County State's Attorney's Office for 20 years. Could you describe the roles that you have played and fulfilled here in this department?
Absolutely. In fact, it was kind of shocking for me to realize that this July will be 20 years since I've worked with the State's Attorney's Office. I actually started after I graduated from college. I had lived in Calvert County for my first 3 years of high school. I was a military brat, and then I moved to Arizona and I went to the University of Arizona. But I stayed in contact with families here, specifically one family that I was a babysitter for. And she was the victim witness advocate for the district court office of the state's attorney. She knew that the criminal justice field is where I wanted to be, and when I was graduating college, she said, "I'm moving. Why don't you apply for my job?" So I did, and that's how I ended up at the state's attorney's office when I graduated college as the domestic violence victim advocate for the district court. It was actually a grant position through the Abused Persons Program at the time. So I did that for a year, and then the state's attorney took that over, and it became a victim advocate for the district court in general, all of their cases. And then I became the victim witness coordinator at the circuit court level. So I handled all of the circuit court and juvenile matters as the victim witness coordinator. And that would be getting background information for the attorneys, doing victim witness notification, doing sitting in the courtroom with witnesses, helping with trial prep for attorneys, filing motions when needed, things like that. I did all of that while I was going to law school in the evening. When I graduated from law school and passed the bar, Judge Riddle at the time was our state's attorney, and he had a new attorney position for me. So once I passed the bar, I actually started here as an attorney, and I first started in our juvenile division. And I did juvenile prosecution. I've done the district court prosecution. I then did burglaries and white-collar crime. I did 1 year of felony narcotics. And since about 2006, I've been doing the child abuse and sexual assault and armed robberies and some of those matters here or there. And I've been part of the prosecution for 5 of our last 6 homicides for the county. And for the last 3 years, I've been the deputy state's attorney here, which is basically the highest non-elected position in the state's attorney's office. So I manage the office when our state's attorney is not here. I can assist with budgetary issues. I'm actually the only other one who can sign for the department for any other issues to help with personnel, budget, training, and things of those matter.
Kathryn, could you share your thoughts on the whole issue of school safety?
Absolutely. School safety encompasses many things. For example, I work with our local school resource officers and our safety advocates on crime trends in the school. I train them before the school year on new things that have come up. I work with our school board as well as many of the PTA organizations on talking about cyberbullying, internet safety, human trafficking. Those are all parts of things that impact school safety. But where our narrative is now the most is with regard to school shootings and how we can protect our students in a school environment, quite frankly, where no student should have to worry about spending their day. In Maryland, we have a statute that is threats of mass violence. However, it's a kind of difficult statute to charge because in order to charge, we need to show that 5 or more people have been placed in fear of imminent bodily harm or death from the threat, that 5 or more people have had to evacuate or shelter in place. And oftentimes, we'll get a report or a tip that somebody's posted a threat, but we get 1 tip or 1 report, and our law enforcement has to go out to find 5 people who may have seen it, who may be in fear, who may know more before we could charge or have probable cause in order to do a search warrant or follow up further areas of the investigation. Now this year, I, as well as other members of the Maryland States Attorneys Association Board, we worked on changing some of the language to this statute. We wanted it to mirror better our threats of arson statute. So for example, if somebody says, hey, I'm going to set fire to your house, that in and of itself would be enough to charge. It's a threat of arson. And we don't need to go through 5 people heard it or 5 people were afraid and ran out of the house. But when we're talking about our students, we do. So we propose to make it that the threat, if carried out, would place 5 or more in fear or would cause 5 or more people to have to shelter or evacuate. I'm pleased to say the Senate voted it and passed it 47-0. However, the Maryland House Judiciary Committee did not let it come to the House for a vote. We will continue to work on that statute. It's a needed change because oftentimes these threats are coming in through a social media posting. The most important thing, though, I can suggest is if you see something, say something. Don't assume that somebody else is going to see the report and pass it on to law enforcement, or don't assume that 5 people already have. Law enforcement needs to hear from anybody who sees a threat of mass violence. The other thing is stay engaged. Ask your kids what's going on. Talk to them about, hey, is there anybody at school who's bullying you? Are you concerned about? Know what's going on in your student's life. It can really make the difference when it comes down to investigations. I will say there have been a couple statutes that were passed this year that will make some changes. One, there is now going to be a protective order for guns. So basically, if a mental health or law enforcement provider or family member sees somebody who is decompensating, they can then file for a protective order with a judge to say we'd like the guns temporarily seized until they can be evaluated, till the court can see them and determine if there's a safety risk. We do have a couple of changes that have come with the School Safety Act. That's going to require additional training for our teachers, our staff, and for even parents to know what to do with an active shooter. There's still more work to be done. The School Safety Act is just the tip of the iceberg of what needs to be done, but I am a mom of 3 boys, 2 of whom are school-age children, so school safety is really important to me, and I'm going to continue to advocate hard to make sure our laws fit our needs.
We're in the law library at the historic Calvert County Courthouse in Prince Frederick, Maryland, with Kathryn Marsh, who is running for State's Attorney. Kathryn, you've been with the prosecutor's office for 20 years. and we've never seen such a serious problem as we have today with opioids, heroin, fentanyl. Could you tell us how you view the subject at this time?
Sure. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that there is a nationwide opioid epidemic going on, and Calvert County is not immune. I think the most important thing that people have to understand is this is not something that we will ever be able to arrest or prosecute ourselves out of. In order to curb this epidemic, it takes the entire community working together. It is a multifaceted approach that requires many moving parts. Arrests, prosecutions are just one part, but we need mental health to be a part of it. Many of our individuals with opioid addictions have a dual diagnosis, a mental health component. Overprescribing is an issue. If you look across the nation, there are a number of states now that have actually signed on for a suit against the pharmaceutical companies for actually lying to doctors about when somebody would become addicted to an opioid. So that's some of it as well. Here in Calvert County, I sit on the overdose fatality review team. It's not a fun team to be a part of. It's not anything that any of us wish we did with 2 hours out of our day every other month. But we bring members of the community from all different fields, from our mental health, from our hospitals, from our drug courts, from the prosecutor's office, law enforcement, parole and probation, pretty much anybody who works with individuals. And we sit down and we review our fatal overdoses. And we look for, is there something we could have done different in this case that hopefully can save the next life? Is there something that we're missing? Or can we compare it to somebody who didn't die and say, we need to do this avenue instead? So, excuse me, as it stands now, every other month we meet and we review our fatal overdoses. This year so far in Calvert County, we've had 6 individuals who have lost their life to their opioid addiction. We've had a total of 42 overdoses, 6 were fatal. The average age for somebody who dies in Calvert County from an opioid overdose is a 34-year-old male. Oftentimes we tend to think that this is a young disorder, or this is affecting our high school and our college students. And I think we really need to know the facts, and we need to understand that this permeates every part of our community, but it truly is those individuals in our 30s that are dying the most in Calvert County.
For a final question with Kathryn Marsh, we're here in the Law Library, the historic Calvert County Courthouse in Prince Frederick. What projects excite you the most that you're working on now and you'd like to bring through to fruition?
I love that question. So last year when I first announced that I was going to run for state's attorney, I was asked what would I want to do different, or what would I like to bring to the county? And my first answer was a child advocacy center. Child Advocacy Center is something I've been working on with other members in our community for over a decade myself, and I know in fact others predated it, almost going back 20 years ago. Was able to work really well with our Child Protective Services Director, Brenda Carr, as well as our Lieutenant Tim Fridman of the Sheriff's Office. And in September, the Calvert County Commissioners approved paying the lease for a building for our Child Advocacy Center. I then met with the Calvert Family Advocates, who is a nonprofit, and agreed to take on our Child Advocacy Center as a project, and they worked really hard to get us donations that pay for the security system, the electronics, everything we need, so that this is at no cost outside of the rent to the citizens of Calvert County. But a Child Advocacy Center is one place that a child who is a victim in a neglect or an abuse or sexual assault case, or even a chronic runaway, will come, and every party who is part of that investigation comes to them. As it stands now, we may get a victim of child abuse who, in order to have a sexual assault exam, we may have to drive to Holy Cross in Baltimore for that sexual assault exam to be done on a pediatric patient because I don't have one here. Or we may need to take them to another location, right now Charles County, to have a video interview done. In which case we are re-traumatizing this child over and over and over again by putting them in vehicles with strangers, by having them driven all over the state. Now we will have one place that everybody will come to the child. So the physical or sexual exam will be done there. The interview will be done there by a certified licensed forensic interviewer. And while that forensic interviewer is in the room, I, as a prosecutor, law enforcement, will be watching in another room. So if there's questions we need for our case, we just ask the interviewer in the earbud. So that child only has to go through one interview as opposed to interview after interview after interview. This Child Advocacy Center will reduce the trauma that our most vulnerable victims go through. And it is my belief that this will be opening within the next 30 days, and we will be able to start serving the kids in our county. We figure on average we're going to have about 200 to 250 children that will be seen at our Child Advocacy Center. So that was number one. Number two was trying to find some way to work a mental health court into Calvert County. For our local jail, on average, about 50% of our inmates have a mental health or behavioral health diagnosis. If we don't work better to provide wraparound services to make sure they're receiving medications that they need or counseling treatment that they need, we are just having a revolving door. They'll go into our jail, they'll come out, and without proper treatment, there will be another petty crime that will be committed. At the beginning of this year, we've put together a meeting that I've been thrilled with the judges from district court and circuit court, as well as our mental health providers in the county. Everybody's agreed we're going to start a mental health docket by the end of summer. There'll be one in district court and one in circuit court, and we'll start putting these wraparound services in place, and hopefully it will be as successful as our drug court in reducing recidivism and making it just a safer place for everyone in our county.